The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.
And here we are, the start of episode 30, our unofficial, unendorsed by National Geographic Shark. And we are joined by Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and, more importantly for this episode, shark expert, Yannis Papastamatiou. Close
Got
enough?
Got it right. That was good.
That will do it.
Yes! Nailed it. Nailed it.
Go
Thank you
so
so
much
much
for
this
joining us
episode was a
tonight,
success. It's great to speak to you, Yannis, and just from doing a little bit of research, it's been a fascinating life that you've lived in terms of your travel and your education and everything. You seem to have been everywhere and been lucky to tie it all in with some jiu-jitsu. It's been pretty fascinating.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I have definitely moved around a lot. I'm actually originally from London, so London born and raised. Moved to Greece, lived in Greece for 7 years, back to London, back to the UK, London, and then moved over to the US and have lived all over the US from California, Hawaii, Florida, and a brief couple of years in St Andrews in Scotland. And then, as you said, luckily, I was able to pick up jiu-jitsu about 17 years ago, and it's something I've never stopped doing.
Yeah, it's a pretty difficult thing to give up once you start. It gets under your skin, and it's impossible to give up.
It is, yeah. I mean, and I it was definitely not the first martial art I had come from. I started with Taekwondo and Aikido and kind of sort of classics like that, and then had moved into boxing for a while, and Israeli Krav Maga, which is what I was doing before I got into jiu-jitsu. And it was actually through Krav Maga that my interest really kind of started, when they started introducing some ground fighting and said, we've taken this from Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I thought, I liked the rolling around grappling part. So I thought I'd give it a shot. And the interesting thing about Brazilian jiu-jitsu is it's a fairly young style in a lot of ways. So it's not something that you can find everywhere. I've been fortunate that for the most part, I've lived in places where there have been really good instructors. But I mean, in the UK 15 years ago, there was maybe 2 or 3 places in the whole country you could find a place to train. And in other parts of the world, there was no, there were countries where there was no instructors. So it's certainly not something that is as easy to find. Now I think it's changing, but it's changing pretty dramatically even over the last few years.
Yeah, definitely. Is it, how does it feel then when you're doing the old day job and you're the second most capable thing in the water?
I mean, most of my day job is like this in an office, So I get to do some really cool stuff in the water. But that still probably makes up about 20% of my time. So despite all the cool videos, I would still say 80% of my job is behind a desk. So I need the jiu-jitsu to keep me going.
We were saying off camera, weren't we, before we started recording, that jiu-jitsu and sharks have this kind of link where typically white belts, now that me and Chris are blue belts, we can say that, but the little white belts, when they talk about, the mat is the ocean and I'm the shark.
Yeah.
Going on. But you literally are that, you're a shark expert and a black belt in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that quite a bit. I would say, I get far more nervous around humans than I do most sharks. So I think, often the dangers may not be where most people think they are.
Yeah, I was in interviews, but as Chris was saying, research, you were talking, I think it was through Vice, you were saying there was one time you had to use mind control on a shark.
Yeah, there was. It was a shark it was a reef shark that we'd caught to tag, and we basically had it on the boat and we're putting the tag on, and I was, pinning it down. And these are incredibly strong animals, I mean, they're basically all muscle. And so even though it wasn't that big a shark, it just suddenly launched into action. And, she just basically bucked and threw me forward, and I basically had, I used mount control. I pinched my knees and got my legs underneath, which was good because otherwise my head would have face planted by her mouth, which would not have been good. So I was able to use mount control to maintain position, and I think we tagged her and released her. But that may be the only time jiu-jitsu has been used on a shark.
What would you have done if the shark shrimped and got out?
I don't know, because I said her mouth was free at that point, and I just remember because of that sort of mouth control, I was able to stop myself. I launched forward, but didn't go crashing down head first. You don't, it's not a good place to be when you have a shark whose head is free.
So where did the shark fascination start, Yannis?
Well, that I remember being about 5 and telling my mum I was going to study sharks, and so I remember from that early on deciding that's what I was going to do. And again, I grew up in London, so I was landlocked. My dad was Greek, so we would go to Greece every summer. So I spent a lot of time in the water. You don't see many, if any, sharks in Greece. There are some there, but you're not going to see them. So I never saw any. But my love of being in the sea came from that. And as far as the sharks, I mean, I remember there was a few key documentaries, and it's not like it is today. Now you can turn on the TV at any point and see a shark documentary, or you can find stuff online. But in the 80s, it wasn't like that. And there were very few film crews that were going to film sharks. Very few diving camera people were willing to get in the water with sharks. So there was a National Geographic documentary in particular that I really loved, and I had it on VHS, and I just watched that continuously. And that really helped my interest. And the other thing that also got me interested was actually Jaws. I know normally Jaws had the opposite effect for many people, but I actually thought Hooper, who plays, who was the biologist, played by Richard Dreyfuss, was a really cool character, and I just found the whole thing fascinating. It's a great film. I love Jaws. I think it's an amazing film. But those, I'd say, were the things that kind of got me on my path towards wanting to study sharks.
I don't know if we need to double back for younger viewers to explain what VHS is.
VHS is this primitive tool, but that we used to use to watch films. That you had to it was basically a very large tape, and I played it until it was worn down.
Yeah, it's I think I was one of the sort of kids who I was fascinated with when I was younger, kind of dinosaurs. And then it was when I figured out, I couldn't even tell you what age, probably similar age, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, and figured out there was a thing called a megalodon. And then it was like, whoa, this thing's and it was like, and then even now, to be fair, every now and again there'll be like some, really crap sighting of a megalodon, and I end up going down this rabbit hole again, like, what the fuck, is there a megalodon?
Yeah.
So just to be sure, have you seen a megalodon, Yannis?
I will. Excuse me 1 second. All right.
That's all good. So you were saying, Chris was just checking, have you seen a megalodon?
About megalodon. And what you said before that? Oh, dinosaurs. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll say that I had the same thing. I definitely had my dinosaur phase as well. And I can't remember if that was before the sharks or during the shark phase, but I went through the same thing. And I remember that very clearly because of the Natural History Museum in London, which had some of the dinosaur exhibits. So I had that interest as well. It's funny you mentioned megalodon because, again, back in the 80s, outside of a small number of scientists, nobody knew what a megalodon was. That was, it's not the buzzword it is now, where everybody knows what a megalodon is. And then to answer your final question, no, I can say definitively here on this podcast that megalodon is extinct, despite what some say. What some may wish it is. So we just have to, imagine what it was, and that.
Yeah, I didn't think it still existed, to be fair.
Well, there is, there's definitely continued, groups of people out there who do believe very strongly that it still exists or that it could exist, and I'm going to say that it doesn't, and it couldn't.
The most recent picture that was like, I don't know anything about sharks really, but there was one like from World War One next to a submarine. Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah, so that's great.
But yeah, I didn't know. That's what I'm saying. So
yeah, so what really caused this problem was it was actually a show on, I think it was on Shark Week. It was a fake documentary on Megalodon, which had marine biologists who were actually actors. They weren't real biologists, and then they had a series of these pictures that one of the ones you described, which is 100% fake. And they did have a disclaimer at the end of the show, which was kind of, I think it came very, very quickly at the end. This is not real. But most people missed that part. So that really triggered a huge amount of like megalodon conspiracies and things like that, people believing that there are actually megalodons out there. Now, there's some huge white sharks out there, so we can be, take that instead.
Yeah,
Yannis,
definitely.
if you now tell me that my guard passing sucks, I'm done as a human being. That's
we've never guard passing.
It's quite funny. So it's such a fascinating topic because I've seen so many of those kind of memes about when people are swimming with sharks, and it's like here's the most dangerous the most dangerous species on planet, and next to it it's a peaceful shark. You're like, oh, it's quite but I know you say that they're not what they're kind of portrayed to be.
No, they're not, and it's been really nice to see that the public image of sharks has changed so much over the last few decades. I mean, I would say I started studying sharks about 20 years ago. And even in the last 2 decades, the public opinion of sharks has changed a lot. And if you compare that to what it was in the 70s or 60s or 50s, it's just completely night and day. So I think more and more people are realizing that they're not the killing machines that they've been portrayed as. The chance of getting bitten and killed by a shark is extremely low. For the most part, human-shark interactions are completely benign and peaceful. But at the same time, they're not puppies, or they're not kittens, and they're not pets. They're wild animals, and they can cause harm or kill you. Some of them, and they have done. It's very rare, but it's you've got to, anytime you're in the water with one, respect it for what it is, and certainly don't take this approach that it's incapable of hurting me. It's not going to hurt me, because again, it's a wild animal. It's not concerned about your feelings.
Yeah. How nervous were you the first time you I don't know if you remember the first time you kind of went into the water with a shark? Because even with your training, your understanding, is there still that bit in the back of your brain that goes, shit, this is actually a shark? And do you still get that feeling, or is that just through repetition?
No, I mean, so I do remember very well the first shark I saw, and that was actually in the UK. It was off Weymouth, I believe, in South England, and it was it was a little cat shark that was about that big, and I was overjoyed. I mean, I really was. That was my first shark. I think I was like 18, 19, and I was really overjoyed. Before I answer your second question, I think we use the generic term shark, but obviously sharks can range from species that include cat sharks to tiger sharks to white sharks. So it's a huge range and variety of different species, and some of them I'm extremely comfortable in the water with, and other ones I absolutely am always going to have some degree of nerves and watch my back. I mean, we occasionally, for some of the work I do, get in the water with white sharks, and there'll be never a time where I'm going to be complacent and not nervous in the water with a white shark, because you got to be on the game. Otherwise, even though the chance is small, even a small nibble could be fatal, and you just you can't ever let your mind wander.
Yeah, I think in fairness, you're saying the wild animals, and you sometimes see these, there's so many animal videos where you've seen people trying to seeing a bear and trying to take a selfie with a bear, and then it's like, what the fuck, what are you doing? There was one with a tiger and in a lion enclosure with a woman. I think she fell out. I think it was a Chinese woman. I think it was in China, and I'm sure they had like a falling out. And she got out of the car, and instantly the tiger just grabbed her and dragged her, just took her away. And you're thinking, what are you doing? What do you think these are?
Yeah, and obviously, some of those terrestrial predators are probably significantly more dangerous. So, for example, tigers, they're definitely confirmed cases of tigers that have targeted humans. Again, I don't think it's that common, but it's definitely there are cases of one tiger or even one lion that have targeted multiple humans on multiple occasions. You really don't ever want to run into a grizzly bear that's out foraging, because again, I think the chance of getting attacked is probably much higher than it is with a shark. So I think there's much lower risk with sharks, even big sharks, compared to some of the land predators. But at the same time, you're right. You've got to, doesn't matter whether you're talking about a bear or a tiger or a shark, you've got to just give it the respect for what it is. And again, it's never doing anything to be malicious. But it also doesn't care about your feelings. And for whatever the reason, it would take very little effort to cause you significant harm or kill you. And you always have to have that mindset. And again, it varies. When I work with some small reef sharks, I'm not concerned. But when I'm with the big ones, I always go in with I'd say sort of a healthy nervousness.
Yeah. Just talking about while we're on the subject of dangerous animals, Yannis. I know you're in Florida just now. How are you near any? Because I know there's like quite a big problem now with alligators and like pythons and stuff. Are you in regards to that?
So alligators you will find throughout Florida. Pretty much anywhere where you have water, there's a potential for an alligator to turn up. And so that's something that I think everyone in Florida is pretty familiar with. I've actually done some research on alligators. So I don't only work with sharks. I call, my lab is called the Predator Ecology Lab. So we do work with some other predators, and alligators have been one of them. Alligator attacks are very, very rare, but they have happened. And obviously, the places you find them in, like in some of the freshwater swamps, things like that, are not really places that people go to swim. So they don't have as much chance of interacting with humans as opposed to, let's say, maybe sharks along the beach. Again, there are some. So I'm in Miami, and we're right next to the Everglades. So the Everglades is where you do find some of the pythons, for example, that, they're really big. I mean, some of them eat alligators. We also have crocodiles there. We do have saltwater crocodiles in the Everglades. Again, for the most part, they're staying in the Everglades, which is not a place that anyone goes to swim. So we have very, very little human interactions. I've not heard of a python attacking anyone in Florida, and I don't think I've heard of a crocodile either. Again, because where the crocodiles are, there's not much human activity.
Yeah, so I suppose it's that distance, isn't it? Keeping it away from that human animal interaction, or the opportunity to have those interactions are lower.
Absolutely. So when you look at whether it's number of shark bites or alligator bites or whatever it is, it's always partially going to be a function of how often do humans and that animal cross paths and interact. So if you look at shark bites, you get more in the summer. Why? Because more people are in the water in the summer. And so that obviously means that the chance of a shark and a human crossing paths and it being negative goes up.
Yeah, it makes sense.
If there's no humans there, then you're not going to have an interaction. So,
just makes sense.
So I was going to say, do you think that's part of the reason of the increase of attacks is that more people are spending more time at the beaches, in the water, maybe surfing, scuba diving, stand-up paddleboarding, those activities have maybe became more popular? So again, just the higher level, higher incidence?
Generally, yes, because again, if you look at the number of humans, doing in-water activities, whatever that may be, that's obviously gone up a lot in the last 100 years. And so generally you will see an increase in the number of bites taking place. And it's going to be interesting to see what the numbers are after this summer, because with COVID, that has obviously probably had a big effect on how many people go in the water. And so I would expect to see that the bites are going to be much less this year. Now, who knows if that's going to be true or not, but we'd at least predict, just because there's going to be less humans going in the water, that there might be less bites.
Would that have, on the flip side of that, Yannis, would that have an effect potentially next year if sharks start coming a little closer to shore? Would that have an effect? Is that possible? The sharks would come further in towards shore?
There's we have noticed, and this is not scientifically proven, I'm just saying based on observation, that, for example, in the waters around here, around Miami, we have this sort of region between the ocean. You could basically go through the channels. You have this region of water called the Intracoastal, and so it's it connects to the ocean, but it's in between the city, between Miami Beach, for example, and the rest of Miami. And we have had more observations of kind of big sharks coming into, not just sharks, big animals coming into the Intracoastal, especially during the lockdown period. So big hammerheads, for example. And I think if it is due to the lockdown, it's probably because there's been a lot less noise. It's a very popular area for boating, for example. And with the lockdown, there was very, very little, if any, boating going on. So it must have been an unusually quiet environment. You may not think of the ocean being noisy, but believe me, you can hear noise if you start to listen. And so I do think there probably were more animals coming in close to shore. If that's true, that's not going to last long. As soon as boat activity increases, which it already has here, you're probably going to get those animals leaving. So I doubt there's going to be any effect by next year. I'd also add that by where the beaches are, sharks regularly go very close to the beach anyway. So that part is probably not changing much because you'll see them right up by the sand in a normal year.
Yeah. It's always crazy seeing those photos. We were watching one the other day, a documentary about sharks, and it was showing that overhead, almost like a drone shot, and people are paddling probably mid-thigh depth, and there's sharks on the beach side of them.
Yeah,
and
so we have that
oblivious because they're obviously smaller.
Well, we have that every year. So it's those are mostly blacktip sharks. It's a migration. They migrate up from up north, and they come down every winter. About the spring here, and they migrate back south again, and they are in their thousands. I mean, there's thousands of them. It is. I mean, you look at the aerial footage, and it's incredible. They're actually very, very shy. If you get in the water with them, it's very difficult to see them underwater because if you ever get in the water, they basically scatter. And so often people don't realize they're there because they don't have that aerial view, and even if they do know they're there, the chance of those animals biting you is really very low because they're fairly small sharks. It does happen, especially under certain conditions, if it's been raining and it's murky, and they might mistake your foot for something else. But generally, the risk is from those sharks really pretty low.
Yeah, this talk of them being reasonably close to the shore, and this is ridiculous because I only swim in the ocean in Scotland, but it still freaks me out.
Yeah, it's if you're not again, I grew up in the UK, so I'm also like it's not something we're used to. But even here, I think people have only realised the extent of how many sharks are in the water, and by that I mean the public, recently, and that's because now we have things like drones, which everybody owns, and so there's so much video of these sharks. I mean, 10 years ago, if you weren't flying a plane, you weren't going to be seeing that. And so there wasn't that sort of, not that it was unknown to science, it obviously was, but it was definitely not as clear to the public. Scotland, you may not have sharks right up close to the beach, but it's actually a pretty sharky environment. So it's actually a good place to study sharks. You do have quite a few different species of sharks in Scottish waters.
Scottish waters was the first time I saw a shark. I'm originally from Arran, over on the west coast, and we get the basking sharks migrate up the west coast. And the first time I was out with my grandpa, and I was in an old-fashioned wooden rowing boat, and my grandpa tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Look," and we, a rowboat 4 or 5 foot long, and this sea monster, when you're 5 years old, with its mottled back, just appeared, bumped the boat, and the boat wobbled, and obviously I screamed in an unmanly fashion. And my grandpa said, it's fine, it's the basking shark. And I had never seen a shark before up until that point. And it had the massive broad back, and the nose out the water just cruising along.
Yeah, I mean, you're incredibly lucky. I actually, it's one of the few shark species I haven't seen. So it's actually very high on my list. Despite living in Scotland, it was very high on my list of species I would like to see. And I would, arguably Scotland may be the best place in the world to go and see basking sharks. And you're actually now seeing, an ecotourism industry start on that, where they're taking people out snorkeling to see them, because now people are coming from all over the world to see them, because that's the place to go to see them. And basking sharks eat plankton, so they're actually, they're not a threat in the sense that they're not big carnivores unless you're microscopic crustacean. So you're fairly safe, with the exception of the only basking shark induced fatality I know was a basking shark that sunk a boat and the sailors on board drowned. So that's the only one I know of.
This does not do me any favors when I have to think about jumping in the sea to do some swimming.
You'll know where the basking shark areas are, so I wouldn't. They're not targeting you, so you'll be okay.
I freak out though, Yannis, when I'm in the water. You touch something and you go, oh, I don't know what that was, and it's like an old fishing net or something.
It doesn't help when it's murky and freezing.
Yeah. That is 100% true.
Scotland has actually some incredible dive sites. It really does. Always freezing, but really great diving. But again, I grew up swimming in England, and it's always murky in England anyway. At least where I was swimming.
But you do quite a bit of diving as well. Is that right?
I do a lot for work. In fact, it's almost exclusively for work now. So yeah, diving is a pretty big component of my research.
Yeah, you do cave diving as well, don't you? Technical diving.
I do. Yeah. So the technical diving. I mean, the technical diving is basically any sort of diving that goes beyond recreational limits. So like going much deeper than recreational divers can go, or into caves. So I do actually, some of my non-shark work is looking at coral reefs that are deep, below 50 meters. And so for that, we have to use different equipment and go down for very long dives. The cave diving I do purely for fun, and that's actually really the only sort of diving I do for fun these days. I don't get to do it much anymore. When I lived in North Florida, it's really amazing caves. You need the freshwater springs. It's about a 5-hour drive from where I am in Miami, so I only get up once a year. But I do really love going diving in those caves.
It sounds, funnily enough, we actually have a cave archaeologist, an underwater archaeologist coming on soon. That's goes into caves and stuff. We're really looking forward to that as well. It's something that seems really fascinating to be able to go.
You have
look at things.
Yeah, you do have caves to dive in Scotland, but they sound gnarly. Like they are, the caves in Florida are mostly like big, beautiful tunnels and caves, whereas the Scottish ones are, from what I understand, so tight that you don't even wear fins because there's no point. You're not swimming. You're just putting yourself in a tunnel filled with water, which is not for me. I get claustrophobic, so that tight places are not for me.
We had Andy Torbett who does a lot of cave diving.
I know Andy. Yes.
Oh, do you know Andy?
Yeah.
He was talking about cave diving, and he said there's one, and I can't remember where it was, but the entrance is called the letterbox for obvious reasons. That is literally about 18 inches. Yeah, and you've got to climb through that for like 7 or 8 minutes before you get to the actual cavern. And as you say, 99% of the time it's flooded. It's pitch black. It just sounds like ticking boxes of everyone's phobias.
Yeah. If I want to make myself like feel claustrophobic, I watch some of Andy's videos. So some of the there's one called like the Cavern of Skulls, which is not it's not a good name, right? It's not doesn't bode well. But he does some of the crazy stuff that I would never even dream of doing. Those really sort of exploratory caves, very, very tight tunnels. That's not for me. I have no interest in dry caving. Like again, going through tight tunnels is not. I'm too claustrophobic. So I like the big Florida caves, the big caverns, the big caves there, but not the tight stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I would rather have to fight a grizzly bear than go through one of those tunnels. Genuinely, that's not even a joke. If you watch some of the videos of people getting, especially some of the dry caving videos in England, I think some stuff in Wales and probably in Scotland too. I mean, it's chilling. I mean, there's people, they get stuck and they can take an hour to get a meter, and I can't understand doing that for fun because it makes me feel ill watching it. And in the rare cases where people have died in some of these, not necessarily in the UK, but there have been some fatalities in dry caves because they've gotten stuck and not been able to get them out. And it's just literally, I can't think of a worse way to go. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I know we all do jiu-jitsu, and maybe you don't remember it as maybe clearly. You maybe still do it with guys roll, but that, you know, the first time you get really, really severe top pressure, and it just makes you tap sometimes from panic of, Jesus, what the, whoa, and as you say, step under the earth.
I still get that sometimes. I got it definitely more when I was an earlier belt, and I even remember one time where I was rolling with actually a higher belt. I think I was a purple belt, and they were much heavier than me and better than me. And they had gotten, you know, to, I can't remember, side control or mount, and they had the smother over my face, and they didn't get off when I tapped. And I was tapping more because I was like, it wasn't so much a submission, but I couldn't breathe anymore. I just couldn't see, you know, because especially when you're tired and overheating, and then you can't breathe properly. And I mean, it was a friendly roll, so I was like, you know, I'm done, and they didn't get off, and so they could have submitted at any point, and they decided to keep on going, and I was definitely feeling the panic, like it was coming up, you know, that screaming, you know, want to get out of here, because you just all you can feel is like, and I still get it, and I still, you know, I'll try and not to that extent. When I'm in those positions, I just try and tell myself, you can breathe, you're okay. You can breathe, you're okay, and you can breathe. You may feel miserable, but you can breathe. You'll be okay. But easier said than done, because, you know, when panic kicks in, regardless of what panic comes from, it's very difficult to control.
Yeah, it's not something that's, it does, you know, being smothered or you know, being in a dark cave is not it's not my idea of fun. Definitely not.
I mean,
Definitely not.
I mean, panic is the thing, especially with some of the, you know, technical diving. That's the thing that'll kill you. It really will. And it's keeping that under control. That, you know, again, there's very few situations where you can't get your way out of, and you're just going to tell yourself, you know what, I can breathe right now, which means I can think my way through this. The only problem is, said, not letting the panic take over, which is easier said than done.
Has there ever been any moments in the water, Yannis, with sharks where you've had a brief little, you know, a shark's done something and reacted to something where you've thought, oh, keep calm. Has there been any of those little moments?
They've definitely, I'd say, there've been definite situations where I was like, I need to get out of the water, and you know, in I'm trying to remember now, but in almost all cases, you know, we obviously have to have pretty good top support with our boats, and so the boat was right there, and I was able to get out. I've definitely had, you know, sharks that, for whatever reason, got agitated and started to get snappy, and I was, you know, wanting to get to the surface, get into the boat very quickly. But, you know, one of the worst things you can do is to turn and flee. So you always have to try and keep, you know, face that animal and slowly make your way to get out. But I've definitely been in situations where I was getting, you know, uncomfortable.
Yeah. So do the same rules apply, just what you're saying there about not fleeing, almost with, I don't know, you're saying you deal with other sort of predator ecology. Does that apply to everything then, that instinct for a predator to, the minute the back's turned and something's running, I've got you?
I think the general, and again, I'm definitely not an expert on what you should do against a bear or alligators, but from what I have, you know, the little that I do know about that and what I do know about sharks, you know, it seems to be pretty much the general rule is that turning and running is a really bad thing to do. I've heard people say the same thing, that is really not the thing to do. A lot of these animals, we don't realize, can outrun you. And it definitely is for sharks that you don't ever want to, in those situations, let them get behind you. Certainly when we're dealing with really big ones, if we're ever with white sharks, you never want to have a white shark behind you and not know it's there. So if we are in the water, we always have at least 2 people, if not 3, if not 4, so that all angles are covered. Because, you know, you always want to make sure that animal knows that you know it's there, and that's kind of the most important thing. And one going behind you is definitely more of a risk.
Don't ever let a shark or a bear take your back.
Don't
always pull guard. Well, how do is there things that you do to monitor like behavioural patterns in the water? So when if you're doing something and there's a shark, is there little things that you do to monitor that?
Yeah, I mean, there's things you can look out for, like certain body language that, the way they swim, how they drop their fins, which may be a sign that they're getting agitated. I mean, the biggest sign is they start speeding up. And it may be more that, they're turning very frequently, but the speed at which they're turning. And then, kind of a key is there's generally sort of a healthy distance that they like to keep from you, which may be half a meter or so, maybe a meter. And even if they're coming in close, they tend to sort of maintain that distance. And I think once they start coming beyond that distance, coming even closer, they're kind of, I think they're losing their inhibition of you for whatever reason. And at that point, that to me is, I'll be a lot more cautious. So sometimes they'll come in close. You'll definitely have species coming close, in which case I like to get something sort of up between me and them, like just could be the fin, could be a camera, something so that if they want to bump onto something, it's not my flesh. And if need be, maybe give them a little push. You don't want to start antagonizing them. And I've seen people do this, that their instinct, if one comes in close, is to hit it, or if you have a spear, to prod it. And that generally just really pisses them off. So you want to avoid that, but you want something to put some pressure back on them. And sometimes they'll go around and leave and come back in. And once they've started to do that a few times, if they've done that 2-3 times, then I'm like, okay, this animal has lost respect for me too, in the sense that it's no longer cautious about my presence, which starts to concern me. So at that point, I would definitely, be keeping a very close eye on that animal, and then maybe decide it's time to get out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a fascinating thing to see how, because there obviously is patterns that you could, with anything, there'll be little trigger signs. It's quite an interesting thing to pay attention to. I mean, I've listened to things before about Navy SEALs and stuff saying if they're in the water, they're always taught to punch a shark in the nose and all this kind of stuff. But is that silly?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's silly. I mean, here's the thing: if one does bite you, and you're in the water, then you want to fight back. I think giving specifics on like the death punch, jab the eye, punch the nose, do this. It's more just like start fighting. And yeah. I think a vulnerable location is going to be the eyes or the gills, but good luck trying to find that in the moment. But definitely, I mean, you've got to fight back. So striking whatever it is, and people have fought sharks off before, so that's not unheard of.
I'll put these all in my my memory now.
Hopefully, the chance you ever having to do that is very, very low. So
yeah, but it's one of these things that every time I'm going to be in the water now, even if I'm in a loch in Scotland, I'm going to go, is there a shark in here? What did Yannis tell me?
Well, I worked with a cameraman who spent a lot of time diving in the water. We did some diving projects together, diving very deep lakes in the US, very deep wrecks, shark stuff. And I asked him what the creepiest dive he had ever done was, and that was a TV show they did in Loch Ness, where they sent him into Loch Ness at night to film, and he just was like, it was eels. There were eels everywhere. He just said that place really just scared me more than anything I'd ever been.
Sorry, 2 seconds. I just need my low battery lights just came on. I can still hear you, but I need to plug my light in. But yeah, I know quite a few people that have been on Loch Ness and done all the tours and all this kind of stuff, and they've always said that it's like, I can't remember what the stat is. It's like, is there more? I think there's more water in Loch Ness than there is in all of the like rivers and lakes than Wales and England combined, or something.
I don't know the statistics, but it is very, very deep, and it gets deep very quickly, and it's just very, very dark. Very dark water, which is, you may think of, obviously diving anywhere at night is dark, but there's a big difference between being in very clear water and being in very dark water. Yeah. And I think it's also, Loch Ness's reputation is going to play on your mind no matter what You might tell yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super peaty as well, the water, isn't it? It's full of peat.
Yeah,
Like,
I think that's what gives it the
if you
colour.
switch-
Yeah.
Yeah, if you switch a lamp, a diving torch on, it does that. You ever driven in the snow and put full beams and it just goes like Star Wars?
Yeah,
and
so it reflects the light and you can't see anything. But I'll say, I want to add I've been kind of focusing on the negative things to look for in sharks when you're in the water with them, but there's generally nothing more stunning, in my opinion, than being in the water with sharks. I mean, they're just incredible animals. And of the, probably close to, 1,500 dives I've done with sharks, a handful have been uncomfortable. So for the most part, it's just an incredible experience and a positive one.
Yeah. Speaking to your inner 8-year-old Yannis, is there a dive out of those 1,500 that sticks out as like the favourite one that, God, if the 8-year-old me knew this had happened, do you know, that kind of thing?
There actually is. There is. And I say this because I've been able to do some incredible dives around the world, but the most incredible was I did a research/filming trip. It was over 2 years to an atoll called Fakaraba in French Polynesia. And it was a National Geographic film came out of it called 700 Sharks that came out a couple of years ago. And we were studying the hunting behavior of the grey reef sharks. And basically, this atoll, you have a very tiny village next to a channel that's flushed by tides. It's not that deep, about 30 meters, about a kilometer long. And living in that channel, you have like 400, 500 reef sharks, incredible density of sharks. And during the day, they're just all very complacent, swimming in this sort of very beautiful, calm manner. But we were doing the dives and the filming at night, and it's literally 300 hunting sharks tearing reef fish to pieces around you. I mean, they are going in, and you can hear the coral being picked up and smashed. It sounds like a bulldozer. And it's those sharks going after fish that are trying to hide. I mean, seeing natural predation in the wild is very rare. I think I've seen it before I'd gone to French Polynesia 2 or 3 times. There, I mean, you can see it 30 times on one dive. It's just fish being torn to bits. And often, if a fish flees towards you underwater, you suddenly have 30 sharks crashing into you, trying to get it. And you just have to, we didn't get bit. But you have to freeze and just go into a ball. What you do not want to do is doing anything like that, any sudden movement, and you probably would get bit just because they, are going to bite something that's moving. When you're not moving, they'll crash into you, but aren't biting. But that is unlike anything I've ever seen before in my life. I came out when I did the first time I did that dive. I was very nervous before the first dive because it's dark. We were a small group. I just was like strong currents and I knew what I was in for. So I was pretty nervous. But I came out of that first dive and I just was like, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. On one dive we had all that, and then like a 3.5 meter great hammerhead came in, which the hammerhead's actually hunting reef sharks. So I think they were coming in looking for grey reef sharks that were eating reef fish. And so I remember very specifically after that trip saying I couldn't even have dreamed up seeing that because until the film crew started to film this a few years ago, I'd never seen anything like that before. So I didn't even have that as a reference to say, I want to do that at some point. It wasn't on TV. So I couldn't even imagine that it would be like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. No, just saying, it's always really nice when you see somebody who's got like a passion, and then they get to see like their the biggest fantasies playing out right in front of them. It's such a cool thing when you see the passion in it.
Yeah, and there's been multiple times. I mean, many times I just come from dives and just like I dreamed of seeing stuff like that when I was 8.
Yeah.
So it's very. I'm very fortunate that I can do those things I dreamed of doing.
Yeah, I mean on the flip side of that, Yannis, what's the one that's the one adventure dive to go looking for sharks and stuff? What's the one that's got away from you so far? What's the one that you want to do
that I haven't done?
Yeah.
Well, I've not. The basking sharks in Scotland is high on my list. There's definitely, I mean, there's lots of places I haven't been to that I'd love to get to see. Cocos Island off of Costa Rica. I'd like to do some more open ocean stuff. Like I've never seen a mako shark underwater. I have seen a blue shark, but not in large numbers. So I'd like to go to some of the places where you can see lots of blue sharks. I'd actually like to go on some of the dives where you can see marlin, which are the billfish, with the long bill. And there's dives off of Mexico, for example, where they hunt schools of fish, and it just looks incredible. And that I've seen marlin before underwater, but I've never seen them hunting. So I would love to see that. I'd also like to go and dive up in the Arctic. You have Greenland sharks, so that live in very cold water. I would love to dive with them. That would be something cool as well. So there's definitely, still lots of stuff I have to do.
Lots to do.
Yeah.
And of course, if you come to see the sharks in Scotland, we're going to insist that you come and roll with us at some point.
I would love to. I really loved my time in Scotland. I was living in Anstruther, which is a pretty small village by the sea, and actually that lifestyle really suited me. I love the British village on the sea. I absolutely loved it. I loved living there. I liked the quiet, and I really, Scotland's an incredibly beautiful country, and I made a lot of great friends when I was there. So unfortunately, I haven't been back since I left. I left in end of 2015, but any opportunity I would have to get back to Scotland, I would take.
Of course, Anstruther has the best fish and chips in the world.
Amazing fish and chip. I still sell I'm like promoting the Anstruther fish and chip shop around the world. And I luckily lived like 5 minutes from there, because in the winter it's fine, but in the summer the line for that fish and chip shop is going around the corner. So I would just go out from my house, check the line. I'm not waiting in that, and then when it got small enough, run out, because it really is just something else.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's such a nice little place, Anstruther. Really, really beautiful little place. Yeah, but it's there's some interesting stuff still to be done. I mean, it's quite lucky that I suppose it's not lucky, it's your profession, but you get to go to these really cool places as part of the job. It's quite amazing that people can make these things happen out of their passion and their line of work.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I've been able to explore and go to places all over the world, and there's obviously a lot of places still to see. But I absolutely, I love traveling. I hate flying. I hate airports. I hate planes. Yeah. But other than that part, I love to visit new places.
Yeah. Is there anything in the you said you wanted to do some the open ocean stuff? Is there anything in the sea that potentially scares you in terms of just the size, the depth? Is there any of that stuff that worries you?
There's I don't get me wrong. There's sharks that worry me. In terms of animals specifically, I'm sure there are, and it's often not necessarily at the animal, the specific animal, but the context. Like you may, I think most people, for example, will have an interaction with sharks where the sharks are in a complacent state. They're not naturally foraging. Even if there's bait in the water, they're not in a natural foraging state. And so you may get this impression this is what they're always like, because most people won't see them in a true hunting state. And when we do see them in a true hunting state, it can be a very different and much more intimidating scenario. And I think that's probably true for a lot of big marine predators. One that definitely sounds quite intimidating is the leopard seal, which you get in the Antarctic. So that is doesn't look like other seals. It's actually got quite a reptilian face. It eats penguins. It's huge. It is a massive predator. I know at least one diver has been killed by one. So that definitely looks like an animal you'd have to be very cautious around in the water. But I'll say that my biggest fear being in the water is not the animals. It's things like currents. What has nearly killed me has been things related to, like I said, very strong currents, getting lost at sea. That's something that I'm much more fearful of than the animals in the water.
It's the ocean is something that just terrifies me. And I've swam in the ocean, for triathlons and stuff. So I've swam in it. It's something that is terrifying. It's so vast and deep, and you can't see things, and it's
such
a terrifying place.
And then you can you realize that you get, let's say you get caught in a strong current, and that often happens. The current can suddenly pick up, or you just get in the water and the current's just ripping, and you realize how helpless you are. There's no way you're going against it. There's no way you're going to make it to shore. There's no way that if a boat doesn't find you, you're not going to get rescued. You're not swimming to shore. There's no way you're going to swim against that current, and you just realize how insignificant you are when it comes to being in the ocean. And so my major concerns now with working underwater are safety procedures for making sure the boat finds me. That is my biggest concern. I'm not that worried about the animals. I can handle most underwater. What really worries me is that if the boat loses me, I'm reliant on them finding me. And
I think the important part there is when you're saying if there's strong currents and stuff, you have no chance, and you have no chance.
No chance.
And it's not like no chance, but no. I mean, I did a triathlon you swim from Oban you swim across the Sound of Carrera to the Isle of Carrera, and at the start, you kind of swim this way, but the current's coming this way, so I didn't realize that, and everybody went on this side of the starter, and I went, oh, there's loads of space in this side, I'll start here. I didn't realize I was swimming into the current, and it was only a short, it was only a sprint triathlon, so 750 meters, and it was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, because I was swimming into the current, and it was like I'm knackered, and then go, oh, I need to tread, and then you moved 5 meters further down. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific.
It is, and it's I think people get caught off guard. You may be used to going to the beach in places where these sorts of currents don't exist, and then you go to a place that has rip tides, or a place where the currents are extreme. I was doing some work off Japan. We're doing some shark work a few years ago, and we were working around this offshore island where there was schools of hammerheads. It was an incredible place, but we had a professional free diver who was with us. He was a professional spear fisherman, and he was also a world champion big wave surfer. And so he was phenomenal in the water. And so he and I, we were having some downtime, had gone for a snorkel around some of the rocks. And it was these big jagged rocks, and the currents weren't that strong, where this big surge had come in. And I suddenly found myself sort of, I could see I was getting dragged towards these rocks. And so I was like, okay, I'll swim away. And was swimming, and I would say by the normal public standard, I'm a decent swimmer. I'm not amazing by, compared to professional water people, I'm not that great. And I realized I wasn't going anywhere. And so I look up after swimming for 2 minutes, and I'm closer to the rocks. And so then I'm starting to get the panic, because I'm like, oh, I'm stuck. And so then I'm kicking as strong as as hard as I can to get out. Now my buddy, he's a phenomenal water guy. And so he had just gotten out of the current very quickly, and hadn't realized I was still stuck, because then he was around the corner. So then I was starting to get I was like, I'm in trouble now. I had a camera with me, and I was about to start ditching my camera and everything, because I was like, I can't get out of this current. And then finally I got out, and I knew instantly I'd gotten out, because I suddenly felt that pull ease off, and I realized I'd gotten past that point where the pull was too much for me to swim against. But it's instances like that have been my closest calls, not the sharks.
Absolutely. And I've felt because unlike Chris, I love the ocean. And I used to surf actually in St Andrews many moons ago, up kind of East Sands and around there. And I used to scuba dive a lot around there. And even around that neck of the woods, you get the currents, the riptides that suddenly you're 300 meters further along than when you plan to be, and you pop up, and it's not fun. It's not fun at all. The first few times you get caught in them, you're like, okay, this is how it ends.
Yeah,
because you just know that you're at the mercy of something way bigger and stronger than you.
And again, it comes, the answer often is just not to panic. You get caught in a riptide. The key is don't try to swim against it. You swim perpendicular to it. So you'll eventually get out of it, and then you can go to shore. But obviously most people's instinct is, if you're being blown away from shore, I got to get back to shore. And so I'm just going, and there's no way you're going against a riptide. So then they get exhausted, when again, the thing is, go perpendicular and you'll eventually get out of it. But, again, you're fighting that instinct. And once, I think it was Forrest Griffin in the UFC who was talking about. He said fatigue is, I can't remember what he said exactly, but he basically was like, fatigue changes everything. And it does. You know, you stop thinking, whether it's in a fight or swimming against a current or whatever it is. Once fatigue starts to kick in and you're still trying to deal with the problem, you can't think straight.
Yeah, and this all sounds eerily like the first time you roll with a black belt.
It's funny now.
I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to do.
I remember when I first started jiu-jitsu, you know, black belts had this mythical status because I think, you know, compared to other martial arts, it takes so long to get one, and so there were very few. Now the numbers have gone up. You know, it's much more common to find them than it was 15 years ago. And I've been a black belt for 6 years. I just got my second degree, so 6 years. And now I'm like, I don't think that mythical status applies to me. You know, whether things have changed, whether the quality of white belts has gone up, I don't know, or I'm just getting old and my reflexes aren't what they used to be. But
it's 100% still a thing. It certainly was for me. I think Ali would tell you the same. You know, that when we rolled, you know, the first time, our professor Dan Reed, he's a guy. He's from Dunfermline, but he's now in Taiwan. So he comes over from time to time. And, you know, the first time I got a proper roll with him, he's playing with you to begin with, and then once you try and you maybe get an underhook and you're trying to pass guard, and then it's just like, no, and then it's just like, oh, this is different. I don't understand. And then he sweeps you, and he's on, you know, his top pressure doesn't make sense, and you're like, oh my god, like I understand how to get out of things, and I don't know what I'm doing here. This is just, and it's what, you know, we've said this quite a few times in the podcast, you know, especially in you know, people talk about fighting and, you know, UFC, when I just stand up. You wouldn't. You know, it's like I would just throw away from the current. You don't understand.
Yeah, easier said than done. I mean, what I know, you know, with white belts, I've noticed, you know, that there's a few different categories in terms of how they roll when they go with higher level belts. You have some who are just very nervous and just very cautious, almost like they don't want to piss off the higher belt and get hurt, even though any decent higher belt would obviously not going to hurt them. But they seem very cautious. Or there's others that are trying to be technical, and obviously because they're white belts, they're not, and you know, they get obviously handled pretty easily on the ground. But that's the learning curve. And then you have those that almost have that, how to put it, their goal in life is to be a white belt who beats up a black belt, and so they're just going at it like, you know, this is the most important moment of their lifetime, and then it's just like, oh god, here we go. So I don't get too many of those, but it does happen.
It's funny, even being a blue belt, and you get somebody. So I'm you know, me and Ali are both, you know, kind of big guys, or bigger guys, and you know, you'll get somebody who comes in as a white belt, and they think they can just attack you, and then, you know, you'll sweep them and tap them, and then they kind of get angrier and angrier and angrier, and they just start attacking you. But the more they attack you and the more aggressive they get, they just keep, you know, pulling their arm out, and you go, oh, thanks. There's an armbar. There's a guillotine. Yeah. There's a frag. They don't realise how it works.
I'm glad that I haven't had that too often. I have had a few times where you have that almost like, as you said, they get angry at getting tapped. And I can't understand personally why, if you go in as a white belt and a black belt taps you, why that would you get angry about it. Maybe, you know, they're pushing themselves, and I mean, which is fine. But some of them are getting more and more irritated, and then they just start making more and more obvious mistakes, as you said. But there's no question, you know, the saying size doesn't matter is certainly not true. You know, size definitely matters. It may not matter as much if somebody is untrained, but there's no question that you have two people with the same. Yeah, if you have two people with the same skill, and the other one's much larger and stronger, then that person's going to probably win. And even in the case you have, you know, people with different skills, but one is much stronger than the other, then that can neutralize the skill difference.
Yeah, 100%. It's you see it quite regularly.
Especially if you look at top level jiu-jitsu competitors nowadays, they're all jacked. They all look like Hulk.
Yeah. I mean, there's you know, we have. I mean, that's why there's weight divisions, because obviously it does make a difference. Funnily enough, when I haven't competed in a long time. I hurt my back when I was just about to get my brown belt, but I competed a fair bit, especially at purple belt, and I actually started to get the most success when I dropped down a weight category. No, sorry, I take that back. When I went up a weight category, because I was doing better against the slower, bigger guys than I was against the much faster, smaller guys. So for me, that helped. Now, of course, then you find there are these big grapplers who move like they're several weight classes lower than they actually are. So they have it all. They have the strength of being a big guy and the speed and skill of being a small grappler, which is I don't have, but there's a few individuals who are lucky to get both.
Now, who was it you got your blue and purple from, Yannis? Was it Henzo?
Helson. So I started training.
Helson
Gracie actually lived in Hawaii. So
okay.
That's when I first started. It was training, under Helson, and I trained with him till I was 4-stripe purple, and then I moved to North Florida, and I started training with Beto Nunes, who was he's now a 4th degree under De La Riva. So I got my brown and black belt from Beto under De La Riva's banner, and then when I was in Scotland, I was training with Rick Young up in Edinburgh, and then the last 4 years I got I've been training with Cyborg at Fight Sports, and so he gave me my 1st and 2nd degree.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And are you still training regularly?
Oh yeah. I haven't been because of COVID.
Yeah.
But before that, I try to train at least 4 times, maybe 5 times a week. And now, as we were discussing before we started, I started training judo again as well. But I'm trying to be consistent. Obviously, again, COVID has thrown a wrench in the works of being consistent. But once things quieten down, I'll go back at it.
Definitely. Me and Chris have half joked that we're going to hand our blue belts back at the end of COVID. It's been such a weird time to have dropped.
Yeah, when the lockdown ended, I had initially gone back, and I had the same thing. I just was like, I haven't trained in 3 months, which it was the longest I've gone without training in 17 years, and I just was like, what's it going to be like? It was okay. The only thing I'll say is that pretty much everyone else is in the same boat, so it's not like it's just you not training. But it definitely, it's been such an important part of my life for the last 17 years. Despite injuries and things like that, and I have never stopped training, and I never plan on stopping training. So this lockdown period has been, that's definitely been something that has been challenging, not being able to do that.
Now, how do you, me and Ali are the same opinion now that we'd like to train as long as our bodies will allow us. So how do you, you said you had some back issues, Yannis. How do you manage them? How do you roll now? And thinking that you want to, you still want to roll when you're 70. So how have you changed?
Yeah, so again, I hurt my back especially bad when I was just before brown. And I had to change some of my game. So, for example, a lot of the inverted stuff, I just couldn't do it anymore because it was in my lower back and just couldn't. So I started playing top game more. So, what I do now is, there's a certain period if you injure yourself. There's a certain period, if you go back and train, you're just going to really hurt yourself. So there's a definite period right after you hurt your back. I actually hurt mine a month ago pretty badly again. And for the next 2 weeks, I couldn't train. It was so bad that if I went and did any training, I was going to, really hurt something. But other than that, you just have to find ways to be able to roll around that injury, and if it requires changing your game, what you do, So once I started going back, again, I was very concerned my lower back was going to flare up again. So there's just certain moves I wouldn't do. I wasn't going to do a butterfly sweep. I wasn't going to do anything that required elevating and having that weight on my leg. So I'd play De La Riva guard, I'd play closed guard, or I'd play top position. I just would avoid the moves that hurt. I'm quite cautious with takedowns, again, for that reason. but again, I try and train hard. I don't want to just be like just practicing the move. I like to roll and train hard. So I will still try and go train as hard as I can. I just know your limitations. And again, I'm not a professional grappler, so I have a day job, and I can't afford to get too badly hurt for that. So I know my limitations, and I try and work around it.
And do you get, have you had a lot of rounds with Cyborg? Is that something you get to do?
I've managed to go. I mean, I've managed to roll with him a fair bit, and obviously, he's he's nice enough not to give me like a couple of minutes, because he could finish me in 30 seconds if he wanted to. I mean, he's just like he's an example of a very big, strong guy who moves like someone who is much smaller. So his game, in fact, that's where he became famous. His tornado guard. He has a style that you don't see in many big guys. It's more of a small man's game. But he's able to use that with his size and strength as well. And so obviously he could walk right through me at any point. But it's always a great honor to train. And he's a great instructor. It really is. Like I said, he doesn't just go in there and tap you out just because he can. But I mean, I feel like a white belt. I do. There's no one to deny that. But he tries to teach you during the roll rather than just wreck you.
Yeah, I know. So our Professor Dan Reed, he had Craig Jones over to his academy in Taiwan. It was before Craig Jones had the big breakout at ADCC. I think he tapped out like Leandro Lo and stuff. That. And he was over, and Dan, our professor, was saying to us, he thought, I'm going to have to give up jiu-jitsu. I'm shit. Like I'm terrible at this now. What is going on? And then Craig Jones went and submitted all these guys. And went, okay, right, no, he's not. He's just just amazing.
So we get a lot of guys at Fight Sports who are very high level. Gilbert Burns, Wagner Rocha, people. So, and again, I'm not going to feel bad if those guys, tap you easily because they're the best in the world. But I've had that when you have an up and comer you may not have heard of, and that actually happened to me in. I was training. I often, when I'm in London, will train with Gracie, Carlson Gracie, my friend Dickie Martin, who runs the academy down there, and. I remember rolling with one of his purple belts, so I didn't know the name at the time. Young 20-year-old, 21-year-old, and I was already a black belt, and a guy wrecked me. I mean, he actually I just was like, I had that same feeling. I was like, oh my god! I mean, I just got absolutely just mauled by this purple belt. But then I realized he's one of the top purple belts in the country, and so then you're like, okay, I don't feel that bad, because when you look at world-class purple belts, they're a lot of them are really quite close to average black belt level easily. There's such a high level. Even world class blue belts nowadays, you're looking at a level of skill that is probably more than most your average black belt would have. But yeah, I didn't feel as bad when I saw his purple belt in competition, but I felt pretty bad after getting just smashed.
Joe Rogan always says that a purple belt's just essentially a black belt if he just doesn't quit at this stage. Yeah. Because it's just the hours on the mat, essentially. In terms of a skill level or move set, whatever you want to think, there's maybe not a huge amount. It's just the ability to do it on repetition.
I think the biggest learning curve and the hardest belt to progression to make is blue to purple. Because that is when, my progression from blue to purple went like that. And then from purple onwards, it's like that. Really the skill level between most brown belts and black belts is not that much. I mean, it's generally a couple of years of brown belt before you get to black, but purple belt is really a huge jump up in skill. Now, obviously, when you're talking about at the world champion level, that's different. I mean, a world champion brown belt is not at the world champion black belt. Those are two different things. But for your average purple, brown, black belt, blue to purple, I think is the most important transition. They also have, you have what's called the blue belt curse, which is that most people who start jiu-jitsu get to blue belt. But the proportion who get to blue belt, who make it to purple belt, is much smaller. That's when you get the most of dropout. And I agree. I think once most people have made it to purple, which is generally about, you can put in 5 years, you're going to go all the way. Once you put in that much commitment, you're unlikely to stop at that point. So I think most purple belts will make it to black.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had kind of thought by the end of next year and maybe a purple belt, but I don't know how far we're going to be pushed back now with COVID, not training so much. But that would be 5 years basically.
Yeah,
I've been training, so I thought that'd be quite a nice number.
It is. I mean, I remember being really. It was a big event for me getting my purple, and the number of years you put into purple is really equivalent to the number of years that would go into a black belt in most other styles. I mean, the average in Taekwondo, karate is going to be 5 years. Would almost certainly you'd be black belt level. So I think that the time frame is very similar to what other styles would be giving.
I mean, in terms of boxing, I had an international bout for Scotland, but it was 6-7 years in, you're still learning constantly. Like, it's not like there's just level, and then you get to that international level, and then there's in boxing is like the Russians and the Kazakhs are like 3 levels above that, and you go, gee, this is incredible how so these tiny little details.
It is
similar to jiu-jitsu. It's amazing.
I started with boxing and I never competed. So when you tell me that you were at international level, that means if I was ever to spar with you, you're going to beat the hell out of me, because that's obviously to my level is very high. But as you said, it's always a big step up. And I think one really good way or area to look at that is in wrestling, which is not that big in the UK, but it's huge in the US. So, for example, you can wrestle at high school, and then you can wrestle at college, and then you have at the US national level or Olympic level. And if you go up against a good high school wrestler, their wrestling is very, very good. A high level high school wrestler, you're like, oh my god. But when those high school wrestlers go up to the college level, then the majority of them are suddenly at a different level, and it's just becomes they're no longer the big fish in the pond. And then obviously if you compare, at the collegiate level, you have different divisions. I mean, if you compare Division 3 to Division 1, which is really the top wrestlers, I mean, it's just like night and day. And then if you're going up to the national and Olympian level, then it's obviously you're at the something else. So
it doesn't
you
make
can be
sense.
very good at one level, and then you get up to the next one, and you suddenly realize it's a whole different ball game.
It always makes me. Sorry, I was just going to say, it always makes me laugh when people talk about wrestling, because it always brings back the nightmares from Naga Europe. I've won a few matches, and I had a German wrestler in the final, and he wrecked me so badly. It didn't make any sense.
Wrestling is so important. I did a bit of wrestling when I was purple belt, and then as I said, I stopped a lot of the top takedown game when I hurt my back, and now that again I'm like, my takedown game is not good, so I started judo again. Generally in the no-gi training at Fight Sports, Cyborg includes a lot of wrestling, so they're big on including that, and I 100% agree. I think if you get comfortable with just jumping guards or butt scooting, things like that, which I often do, again, because of the back, I like to play on the bottom. But I think if you're grappling, you got to know some takedowns and be reasonably good, whether it's judo or wrestling. But
annoyingly,
tough to deal with. You're a big, strong wrestler, and I've definitely had high school or early college level wrestling big guys who come in who may be jiu-jitsu white belts, but they can be a nightmare because they're top, and easier said than done to submit some of them with the just natural top game.
I mean, this was Naga Europe, Yannis. It was heavyweight, so it was under 100 kilos. So the German kid was 6'2", maybe 6'3", 98 kilos, but an in shape 98 kilos, and he was a nightmare. So real strong.
Yeah.
And annoyingly, his jiu-jitsu wasn't actually. I was a better jiu-jitsu player. He was a far superior wrestler, and just in the scrambles and stuff, when I tried to get out, and he was just so much faster in those transitions. his actual submissions were not great, but he was such a good wrestler.
That's their weakness. They don't practice submissions. They also, instinctively may turn their back because the choke threat isn't there, so that's just their instinct. But obviously their takedown game is going to be very good, and their top game can be very good as well. The pressure, their conditioning is very high level, and the transitions. I mean, it's a thing. It's a beautiful thing to watch. I mean, wrestling is incredibly technical. You watch the high level wrestling, and it's just it's insanely technical. And the pace that they keep up is just brutality. I mean, they do not get tired, and they don't ever stop. So they're definitely tough to deal with. And again, I'm a big proponent of rather than the best thing to do is to learn some of that. I'm never a high level wrestler, but I think if you're a grappler, you should have some wrestling knowledge. You should have some judo knowledge, even if you're not great at either. You've got to have some takedown skills. There's also, I think, a difference between, as you kind of alluding to, who may be a better grappler versus who's better at competing. And so competing as a strategy to win on points. And so it could be that somebody stalls the whole match and then shoots in for a double leg and wins the match. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a better grappler than you, but they know have a smart strategy in the sense of winning like that. I remember one time at Purple going up against a guy who, luckily someone warned me that he was a national level Russian judo champ. And so as soon as I heard that out, you better believe I didn't spend 1 second standing up with him. I ran and jumped guard immediately, and I managed to win that match with points. But I absolutely, had I stayed standing up with him, I was going to get face planted, and it would have probably been downhill from there.
I've nearly had that experience. Chris knows about this. There's a guy that trains in our gym, and I didn't know him at the time. And Jim's either a brown or maybe a Dan in judo, and is ridiculously strong. But he's a white belt in jiu-jitsu because he's never graded in jiu-jitsu. And the first time he came in, and he said to me, "Do you want to start standing or should we start on the knees?" And I was like, "I'm just going to go from the knees because I'm not great at takedowns." And he grabbed me and I was like, "Oh," and he just wrapped me up, and I literally couldn't move him. And it was afterwards he was like, "Oh, I was hoping you were going to start standing because I'm a judo guy, so I'd have just thrown you." And I've never been to go back and come, "We'll just start through the knees," because I would have flown. There's no two ways about it, because Jim grabs you and you're like, "Yep, he's going to keep a hold of that collar."
There was a judo Olympian training at Rick Young's. I can't remember his name. He was a purple belt, and I remember rolling with him. And we started on the ground. And to begin with, I was able to go pretty well. I swept, got his back, and I was like, "Oh, okay." Obviously I don't want to stay standing up, but I'm doing fine on the ground. But I couldn't finish him, and then he just suddenly exploded, and it just was like he threw me off. And then, there was also that difference in an Olympian level conditioning versus mine. But I was then I was definitely in defense mode, and his top pressure was insane. Again, maybe not as technical, with judo Nawaza, but the pressure from it, and especially getting fatigued, I was suddenly getting in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, some of those guys are an absolute nightmare. But it's all part of the fun, isn't it? It's all part of the
absolutely.
And
it's an honor. It's an honor to me to roll with people like that. It really is. And again, at Cyborg's place, we get a lot of very high level grapplers come through, and it's always an honor for me to get to roll with them. I try, because I want to roll with them, and I try not to ever make it look like I'm calling them out, because I'm like, "Do you want to roll?" But obviously I'm not like, "You want to roll?" So I'm trying to make it be like, "I'm not calling you out because I don't want you to kill me." But it's an honor for me to be able to grapple.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel, Yannis. Every time somebody, a high level guy comes in to train with us, it's always like I really want to roll with this person, because it's an honor to say that guy strangled me.
Yeah, it is. And I think for most people, that's the experience they have. It's like what the outcome's going to be. If you try your best, but you know what it's going to be, and that's fine. It's more just like to get to experience what it's like. I mean, I got to do randori once, stand up with a guy on the Japanese national judo team, black belt, who was God, he must have been at least 20 pounds lighter than me, if not 30. He was pretty small. And I remember just thinking, just with the size difference, I was a purple belt at the time. I was like, just with the size difference, I'm going to be able to stall a little bit. And I remember he grabbed hold of my lapel, and it was so smooth. I didn't even feel anything. I was just suddenly looking up at the ceiling. Like, it was not like, it wasn't painful. It just was suddenly I was looking up at the ceiling. And I was like, I don't even know what the hell you just did. But the fact that, I'm 30 pounds heavier than you with some background in takedowns, and I didn't even see or notice what was happening. It's a privilege to train with somebody with that level of skill.
Yeah, it's like I say, there's levels. I mean, I've had the same thing, Yannis. Boxing sparring, where you'll spar with somebody who's legitimately world class, and you just going, I know what to do, but I don't understand how to stop this. It doesn't make, this doesn't make sense. Before your nose is burst, and you go, what the.
Yeah, that's again, I love boxing. I love the sport of boxing. I was just not very talented at it. The one difference is that it's a lot less forgiving in the sense of, it's not just getting tapped out. I mean, it's, getting your busted face. And there was that is part of the reason I just like, I don't really want to get punched in the face anymore. That's much fun when I was 20. So, but I really do. I mean, and I think it's something that people who do martial arts and aren't that familiar with boxing really don't realize how technical it is. They just think, oh, you just punch. And it's one of the most technical. I mean, it really is, and most precise combat sports. And also, I mean, especially before I learned about grappling, I think one of the most effective styles for this, self-defense. I really, it's I think very legitimate way of defending yourself is if you know how to box.
I mean, like on the other side of what you're saying, Yannis. So when I boxed, I was one of the guys. I've said this a few times now. I was one of the guys who just went, well, they couldn't take me down because I would just punch them. And then it's not until it's not until you try another sport where you go, like you're saying, the first time you go and do jiu-jitsu and somebody does a double leg on you and you go, what? I don't understand what. How did you do that? It doesn't make sense. It's the same thing. So you have to respect each art.
Yeah, absolutely. And boxing does, I think, open itself quite. The traditional boxing, it's quite open to being taken down. In terms of where your legs are and the way you're standing, it's generally. Perhaps more so than a kicking style because you're not used to kneeing and kicking. So the chance of me shooting in for a double or single and you kicking me in the face is less. So definitely, boxing without grappling is a big hole. But in terms of a striking form of combat, I think it's definitely, in my opinion, one of the most effective.
One of the greatest things in the entire world to watch is two Mexicans who will stay close and trade body shots and bob and weave and slip and set things up is one of the most beautiful things you can watch.
The hand speed of these boxers, the hand speed, the accuracy, it's just incredible. I think my favorite fight of all time was Hagler Hearns. And that, I think, is just like the level. It was, you really, if you were watching that live, you could not say who was going to win. Until finally Hagler knocked out Hearns, it could have gone either way. I mean, it just was the precision and the back and forth between those two non-stop. It just was incredible. I think unless you train it, you realize how hard it is to punch with that accuracy at high speed whilst being hit yourself. I mean, that was, and I say this because I started with Taekwondo. And I really kind of had that opinion that the legitimate martial arts were the ones with belts. That was, I grew up with Jean-Claude Van Damme and stuff like that. So I was like, a real martial art is one with kicks, and boxing is just a sport. And then it was actually when I started my undergrad at Southampton, and some of the guys I was, in my dorm, I started Taekwondo and they started boxing. And they were like, no, boxing is really effective. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then we would just start sort of, at one point we started sparring. And obviously I was just getting, battered because boxing is very effective at getting in close where you can't kick. Now, obviously I'm not good at Taekwondo. So I'm not trying to say it's a Taekwondo versus boxing. I think Taekwondo is incredible martial art, but it opened my eyes to the importance in real combat of being able to punch. And the way boxers train, I mean, again, with Taekwondo, you don't train, at least with your hand, you don't train to hit moving targets. You don't train to hit moving targets and avoid it. And that's just something that boxers do very well.
I love that idea of getting in close. It's you know, when you know, I don't know if you watched in February the Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, the second fight, the rematch. It's one of those crazy things where you know, when that happened and Tyson Fury said he was going to knock him out, and it seemed crazy. Like, why would you want to try and knock out a guy that is an enormous puncher? But if you step into the fire, you take his thing away from him.
Yeah, you do.
It's insane, you know. But to be able to have the confidence in yourself to be able to say, I don't care about your power, I'm going to stay here, and then all of a sudden, if you're not at, you know, full range, you're full extension, you have no power. It's a really bizarre thing to watch, and an incredible performance. You know, from Tyson Fury, that was you know, one of those great you know, nights of British sport. Phenomenal fight, a really an outstanding performance. Quite a crazy thing. You know, he must have an unbelievable belief in himself to try that.
I will say, since I got into grappling, I've not followed, other than the highlights, boxing that as close as I did, especially in the 90s, you know, when I really kind of watched it extensively, and you know, again, you know, I was more on the especially the traditional, the famous classic era of the 60s and the 70s, and, you know, the Ali years, the Sugar Ray Leonard, and those were the guys that I really grew up just admiring.
Yeah, but you know what Fury did that night would be like, be like having a match with Gordon Ryan and saying, "Here's my leg." You know, it seems so crazy that, you know, actually this might work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does help. I mean, he's got a bit of an iron chin. Obviously, no one can't be knocked out. One of my problems I felt with boxing was that I did not have a very strong chin. You know, I definitely felt like it didn't take much to get dropped, and so I don't know whether I was getting hit by really good punches or if I do have a glass jaw. I don't know. Either way, I don't want to put it to the test.
Getting hit in the face is not a great thing. I mean, I wouldn't advise anybody to box. It's not good.
It's not, especially no one who knows how to throw a hook. It really is, and it's not about weathering the pain. It's like your lights go out. You know, that's it.
Yeah. I've always said that to people. You know, and Tyson Fury's always said, you know, all this crazy talk. You know, no man born from his mother can knock me out. And you go, you say that, but if you're unconscious, it doesn't matter how tough you are. You can't get up because you're unconscious.
The fight that actually got me into grappling was not Hoist Gracie, actually, to be honest. It was Ken Shamrock. It was UFC 1 when he fought Pat Smith, who was a kickboxer. And at the time, I didn't know what grappling was. I had no idea. I just saw these two big guys. I thought, okay, they're going to throw down. There's going to be a massive brawl. It's going to be awesome. And I remember Pat Smith saying before the fight that he felt no pain. So he was just like, I'm not concerned about submissions. Not really knew what submissions were then, other than jiu-jitsu guys and Ken, who came from like sort of the catch wrestling background from Japan. And he was like, I don't feel pain, so it's not going to work on me. I thought, well, he looks like a tough guy. He probably doesn't feel pain. And then Ken did this beautiful sort of outside trip, took him down into close guard, and dropped back for a heel hook. And I didn't even know what he was doing. Like, you know, he just seemed flailing around looking for the leg. I'm like, what is that? And then Pat Smith is screaming in pain, you know, tapping and just absolutely screaming. I just was, you know, again, you know, it's you may think that there's no submission that can make you tap, but that's definitely not the case. And that was the match. You know, I want to know what that move was, and it looked really cool. Yeah. And I want to learn more.
That's one of those funny things as well, is when people, you know, and the one that I always go to is, and I am not a Conor McGregor fan in any way, shape, or form, and I ended up having to defend him against Khabib because people were looking at, you know, it was kind of on the chin, and people were saying, "Oh, why did he tap? I wouldn't tap for that." And you go,
"Yeah, I mean,
I promise you." When you have one of the best wrestlers in the world and he has got your chin squeezing, I promise you, you're tapping.
It's just like such an absurd statement. And again, regardless, you know, no one's taken away that Conor's a very, very tough guy. And anyone thinking that they were going to do better at that point, at any point, is laughable. Especially with a guy with Khabib is such a monster, and especially his grappling is just a great.
He's at the minute he is like, to me, he's like the UFC's version of Lomachenko in boxing, where I watch both of them and go, I don't understand how you're doing this. It just seems, it's like it's a, and people don't understand like how this becomes an art. When you watch Khabib slowly, he's got both legs trapped. Michael Johnson, when he had an arm trapped and both the legs trapped.
Beautiful. It's just,
and you watch this going, this is beautiful to watch. Unbelievable.
He's not like a flashy guard player, even though I've seen some of his tournament fights where his guard game's pretty good, but it's his takedowns are so good, and his grinding top control is so good, and that pinning your leg is so good that you see guys who may last that they weather it the first round or the second round, but there's only so much of that you can take, and it's he's a phenomenal grappler, and it's also interesting because again he's not a jiu-jitsu guy. He's a sambo, judo, wrestling background, and very traditional in that sense, and so I really appreciate grappling arts in general, even though I'm almost exclusively Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I always like to see fighters who come from the other grappling styles.
Yeah, I mean,
Barbosa's face when he just hammered him, and I think it was the end of the second ring, maybe the third, and the buzzer went, and he'd just been mauled for the entire 5 minutes, and he kind of stood up with just this look of like, just resignation of, I don't know how to stop this man doing this to me.
And I don't think people realize that mental component when you know that you are now against somebody, and you now know I can't beat this guy. Doesn't matter what whether it's grappling or stand up or MMA. Maybe there's another time you'll beat them, but right now he's better, and it's just mentally breaking you down.
And the thing is, as well, in that point, Edson Barbosa's world class.
Absolutely.
And getting made to look like a novice, getting toyed with, and it's just like, this is, it's like if you watch Vasily Lomachenko and some of his highlights, and it's so beautiful, and you look at it and go, I understand boxing, but I don't know what you're doing here. I mean, your footwork, the way you're changing angles and creating angles, is on such a different level that he's making world champions look, like amateurs. It's so beautiful to watch.
I like, it's one thing I really do like especially with MMA, because obviously MMA has multiple components to it. But when you have fighters who specialize in something before they got into MMA, and they are so good at that angle, like the grappling angle, the stand-up, that they're just on a different level. And when you see them pull that out in these fights, that their striking is they're world-class kickboxers or world-class karate guys, world-class grapplers. And once you get into that world with them, then it's just a completely different level of skill. I remember when Stephen Thompson, who really very high level karate kickboxer, when he first started coming up, and his stand-up skill was just so much more technical than what you were seeing. The way he would throw a roundhouse and put his hips into it at the last second, just a level of detail that you don't see with most MMA fighters, and it was just incredible to watch, because it just was a different skill level. I think some of the elite grapplers, when they get on the ground, and it's almost guaranteed at that point that that person is in really deep trouble.
Yeah. I think it was in one championship as well. I think, was it Sage Northcutt that went there? Is that right?
He went to the UFC, but I think he was at one before that.
He went to one because he fought Cosmo Alexander, who was a top level Muay Thai guy, and I think in his first fight, and he got rendered unconscious.
Yeah, he got immediately
very quickly.
Yeah. That was right. He went after you. That was after his UFC fights, right? He went there. I remember that. And I didn't know who Cosmo was at the time, but then I just was
Yeah.
like, he wasn't flashy. It just was just,
Yeah,
you know,
just
brutal.
there's levels to this game. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's it's those specialist guys are terrifying when you see them against a guy who's just
Yeah.
I'm
I
saying
mean,
just but he's just a mixed martial artist, but a specialist.
no. It's you could see it back, back when Randy Couture was fighting, and there was generally you had the guys who had like high school, college level wrestling were very, very successful, and then you have a guy who was an alternate Olympian, and he was just at such a different level. I remember when he fought Tito Ortiz, who was considered at the time and very successful. His wrestling was considered very good for MMA, and Randy was like, yeah, he wrestled in high school. I was an alternate for the Olympics, and
Yeah,
when they clenched up, it was just so
it was
one-sided at that point.
it was one of those things that always makes me laugh, and people still use this when they, when people use the MMA versus boxing thing, which is stupid in itself. But when James Toney went and fought Randy Couture, you're like,
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was
oh my god,
Tony just flailing in the head of arm triangle, wasn't it?
Randy got his no-gi black belt after that fight.
He did.
yeah,
That's
He
right.
I mean,
got given his black belt for submission grappling from that. I think he had an arm triangle.
yeah, James Toney basically said afterwards, who one of the guys you listen to now, it's actually a shame because he really struggles to speak. He went on far too long, and he said afterwards that he didn't do anything. He just went, I'm a boxer, I'm James Toney, and I could beat anybody. And then Randy Couture took him to the ground, and they went, oh.
I mean, it wasn't that much different from Hoist Gracie against, I think it was Art Jimmerson, UFC one.
Art Jimmerson, yeah.
With the one glove.
One glove.
One glove.
Once he got taken down, he was like, you know what, I'm over this, because he actually tapped. I think he just got mounted, and he just was like, I have absolutely no idea what to do, and it's not worth me getting hurt. I don't blame him, but it was like.
And it's one. And again, if people don't know who James Toney is, I mean, when you listen to the greats of the era, would tell you James Toney was more talented than Roy Jones, more talented than Bernard Hopkins, an absolute genius who didn't train and was really lazy, but supremely talented. And he thought he could go into MMA and just win. And he's like, I mean, Randy Couture's called the Natural. You're fighting at heavyweight, like 265, and you were a really good 160-pound boxer. This is, and it's just like you could see the moment in his face when he's on the ground, and you're like an arm in choke, and you can see the moment in his face. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah, I mean, Randy was a smart fighter. He was also his things was dirty boxing. He had a boxing background, but obviously his wrestling was his real. And obviously he wasn't going to play Tommy in a boxing match. So he was.
I believe Randy Couture was a Golden Glove guy. Sorry,
I don't know. I think because he was in the army, I believe, and he definitely did come from a boxing background.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did Golden Gloves or not, but he had decent at the time box. Obviously, it wasn't high level.
Again, I mean, I was trying to think now. I was trying to explain this to my friend who's not an MMA fan. He's a real boxing guy, and I think it was like I think it might be Cody Garbrandt. And Cody Garbrandt, I'm pretty sure, was a Golden Gloves champion as an amateur boxer. And when he was trying to, I said, no, to win a Golden Gloves championship as an amateur in America is a massive, massive achievement. I mean, you are good.
It's lightning hand speed. Who was Golden Gloves was Stephan Bonner. So Stephan Bonner, when he came on, again, he had a very interesting qualifications because he was Golden Glove, Taekwondo black belt, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And so that was a very, interesting combination. You're like, well, that guy, kind of has it all. And he was, he had a pretty successful career. The other one to me, and probably in modern time, my favorite fighter was Lyoto Machida. And a very interesting sort of story, a sort of style with him, because obviously he came with this traditional karate background, but legitimate karate. I think people, there was at the time this sort of people almost looking down on karate. They were like, no, if you want to learn how to stand up, do Muay Thai. That's the only thing that matters, or boxing. But karate, Taekwondo doesn't work. And clearly that's not the true. I mean, you watch Kyokushin at high level or high level, karate guy or Taekwondo too can be very effective. But Machida had been trained, I think by his dad, had trained him in Shotokan, but also made sure, being raised in Brazil that he had learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he had a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He'd taken sumo, so you could actually see him do with his sumo when people would try and shoot in on him and get the underhooks. He would use karate sweeps, so he had very effective takedowns, but it was from karate, believe it or not. And there was a while then when no one could figure out his style. It was highly effective, and then people I think caught on, and I think age meant his reflexes slowed down a bit. But when he was in his prime, he was just incredible.
Yeah, definitely.
There was that point in the UFC roundabout then where it was like the only person that you could see beating those guys was, like we were saying, the weight category above, because you had GSP, and then above him you had Anderson Silva, above him you had Lyoto. I can't remember who the heavyweight was at the time, because the heavyweight seemed to change every couple of fights, but there was always that thing where it was like the only guy that might have beaten GSP was Silva. The only guy that might have beaten Anderson Silva was maybe Lyoto Machida, because he's got the little bit of size on him. And obviously all at their peak, as you say, before age caught up in reflexes. But there was that interesting time. And then BJ Penn was a lightweight and obviously couldn't beat GSP at the kind of welterweight that each guy was level above.
He had, BJ Penn had, he came very close the first time he fought GSP. That match, and he actually really battered him round one. I think he just lost. Second match was very one-sided, but the first one was very close. And then people forget that BJ also fought Machida. He went up to him and it didn't get finished. He lost, but he actually did not get finished. So I've again, I lived in Hawaii for 7 years, so you'd frequently see BJ at a lot of the jiu-jitsu tournaments. He would often just come and ref and just hang out, so he was often seen around there. But he really was also, I think, in his prime, one of the most talented fighters ever. He really was insanely talented. And starting with his jiu-jitsu, he was the first American to win the World Championships, a black belt in 3 years. That was unheard of back then. And when he started fighting UFC, he wasn't even submitting people. He was standing up and winning. Again, back in the day, his grappling was so incredible that when you did see it, it was just a thing of beauty. I remember watching him fight Matt Hughes, which everyone was like, this is insane. There's no way he can beat Hughes. It's almost insulting that he is even trying to fight Hughes. And he submitted him, and it just was. And I watched that. And I was living in Hawaii at the time, which obviously everyone was going particularly crazy for. So he really was, I think one of the greats as well.
Yeah, one of the original kind of like the early pioneers.
Oh, absolutely.
Where like a kind of changeover point from, some of the early guys who I don't want to say weren't particularly good mixed martial artists, but it was the birth of the fighters who were
very well rounded. They really were, because in the early days it wasn't. You had people who were basically very good at one thing. But not great at other aspects, and then that changed to the true sort of MMA where they were good at all angles of the game.
How are you for time, man? I think we're really
heading on here. 2 minutes.
We can go another 10 minutes or so if you want. So totally up to you.
Are you good for time, Ali?
Yeah, good on 10 minutes. I said I love talking about grappling and martial arts as well, as much as I like to talk about sharks. So I'm happy to do another.
I'm trying to think now. I'm trying to think of some things to wrap up right now. So have you done any rounds with Wagner?
I have. Again, he destroys me. I've only done it. I think I've only rolled with him a couple times, but he's very good. Trying to think who else there's a lot of people who come through. Vitor Belfort, I remember coming through. Who else is?
Guys, leading up that you've rolled with Vitor Belfort, just no big deal. Just Vitor Belfort talking about early phenoms in the UFC.
Well, then quite frequently, Gilbert Burns was training because he trains with Cyborg. So, and he's just another one who really is. He's on fire right now. He really is incredible. Yeah. Again, his pedigree was jiu-jitsu at world-class level, grappler, which he still uses, but his stand-up is incredible. It's just like his stand-up is as hard for anyone to deal with as his grappling is in MMA. So it's really a joy to watch him fight. But yeah, again, we get quite a lot of pretty big names coming through, and I always try to roll with them if I can.
Now, I'm just trying to think now. Is how good is Cyborg's English?
Oh, very
good.
Yeah,
very good.
Very
do you think he would do you think he would understand a couple of Scottish guys?
Oh yeah.
I think reach out to him.
He also, he travels around the world giving seminars, including in the UK.
Okay.
So yeah, he speaks very good English.
We might have to reach out to him then and ask him if he wants to come and speak to us.
Great stories. Obviously, incredible. Grappling pedigree is incredible. Great instructor, and really nice guy too. I really enjoy training with him.
I'll make sure Ali sends him an email or a DM on Instagram and see if he replies to it. That'd be a cool. That would be a cool one. You can only try, right?
He would definitely be a good person to talk to.
Yeah, we'll try. We'll certainly try. Another thing I was going to ask you, Yannis, is what size of rash guard do you wear?
I wear a large. Yes, I'm trying to remember.
You are in luck. I designed my own rash guard for our little morning group, and it's got a shark on it.
Oh, fantastic!
I have one left, and it's in large. So what I'll do is I'll if you send your address over in Florida to Ali, I will send one out to you.
Thank you very much. I would.
Have you got it there for us to show him?
What's that?
I was just looking up on mine about. That's cool.
Yeah, I don't have it here.
I see a shark.
Well, yeah, this is the shark. So this is off it. So it's got this shark on it, and it's you can't really see from there, Yannis, but it's pretty cool. So
the Helio gave each of his sons an animal. Like, not as in he gave them an animal, but they had an animal to represent them. And actually, Helson's, as it was a shark. So the logo, when I joined the Helson's Academy, was a shark in the gi, which was very. I went to Hawaii to do my PhD, which was obviously on sharks. So it was very good. I think to me it signified that this was what I was meant to do as far as martial arts was concerned. That Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was going to be it. Because again, I'd gone through several different styles, and I'm always trying to learn new stuff. I'm always interested in seeing new styles. I really love looking at different styles of martial arts. When I was at Scotland, I was training Kali quite a bit with Rick Young, who, again, talking about someone with an incredible sort of background and history in martial arts. I mean, Rick's
is this right now, Yannis? You might know if you know Rick. I don't actually know him, but apparently he had boxed internationally for Scotland as well. Is that correct?
I don't know if he did. I know he trained. He definitely was training boxing with some world-class guys. I don't know whether he competed, but he has a very, like I said, his background in many different styles at high level, judo, karate, Muay Thai, boxing, Kali. I think he was one of the first Dan Inosato instructors for Kali in the UK. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, of which he was one of the first 3 British-born black belts to get the black belt, which they got at the same time.
Because he was one of the, I can't remember, was it 5 or 6 that got black belts under Maurizio?
Under Maurizio, yeah.
Yeah, there was like 5 or 6 of them that got.
I can't remember who the others were, but I think Rick was one of. There was 3 who were given it, and they were the first 3. They were the first 3 British-born Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts.
He's also he would be the first Scottish.
Yeah, I mean, he's also a combat submission wrestling coach for Eric Paulson, which is catch wrestling based. So he really, just and really, really nice guy. I really enjoyed training with Rick a lot.
He's not a guy you want to cut in front of on the queue for the fish and chips.
Well, the thing is, I've heard a few stories from him, and definitely in his younger days, let's say he's somebody who knows what works in a street situation and what may not work. But now he's definitely, as long as I've known him, one of the nicest guys you'd meet, and certainly would just be like, if you tried to cut in front of him, he'd be like, well, whatever.
Well, I think we'll start wrapping up now. That's about
Good.
another 10 minutes. So yeah, if you send Ali your details, Yannis, I'll get you a rash guard sent out as soon as possible. It was a real good chat. It was a real pleasure to talk to you, and yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on, and definitely I will let you know if I'm in Scotland, and we can roll.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just before we all head off, number one, thank you to Grant Cruikshank. Shout out to Grant for putting us in touch, a mutual friend there, Yannis. If people are looking to find out more about you, your work with sharks, where can they find you on social media or anywhere we can send them? And we'll add this in the show notes, classic Joe Rogan style.
So I'm on Twitter under Dr. Yannis is my Twitter name, and then Instagram is just my first and last name, and then you can actually find my website for work, the Predator Ecology and Conservation Lab, which if you do a search it'll come up, which is I'm at Florida International University, and that's the research lab of where I work.
Cool. I'll add all that into the notes. Awesome. Well, episode 30, the start of Shark Week in the can, heading on to nearly 2 hours. Yannis, thank you so much for your time this evening.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, bye.
The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.